The information shared in this episode is not intended to serve as a substitute for mental health services and is only intended to provide education and information to you, the listener. Has your child disclosed being sexually abused by a family member or someone who is considered to be a part of your family? Are you curious to know how to handle the disclosure in a way that is most supportive to the healing of your child after their experience of trauma? Are you experiencing mixed feelings about your kid's disclosure and want to know how you can cope with your own emotions? If you have answered yes to any one of those 3 questions and are interested in learning more about what you can do after your child discloses that they have been sexually abused by a family member or relative, please stay tuned to this episode, part 2 of the 2-part series on intrafamilial sexual abuse. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I will pick up where the previous episode left off from last week. I provided information related to the occurrence and frequency in which intrafamilial child sexual abuse, also known as incest, takes place. In addition, I shared information about the typical experiences that a child has after disclosing sexual abuse perpetrated by a family member, as well as considerations to be mindful of when attempting to identify the signs that an adult relative may be sexually abusing a child that you know and love. Putting myself in the shoes of a parent who had just learned of their child being sexually victimized by a family member or friend to the family, I would imagine that learning this would be the most devastating, heartbreaking, and carrying a pain so deep that it is truly beyond language to describe. You may feel terrified, thinking, now what do I do? How do I handle this? You may be in denial, like my loved one would never do this. Maybe my kid is confused or altogether wrong, or perhaps they're lying. You may feel a significant amount of rage and wanting to take matters in your own hands against the perpetrator. You might express to the child directly or indirectly that it is best for them to just forget it ever happened. You might be in shock and feeling disconnected from your body, like an out-of-body experience of sorts. You might even feel guilty about what happened to your child and blame yourself for what occurred. There are countless reactions that one can experience, ones that I have been able to identify and name, as well as experiences that I've not considered. What I offer to you in this moment is my sincerest, heartfelt sympathy for what your child, you, and the non-offending members of your family have experienced. There is processing that needs to occur. There is grieving that needs to occur. There are steps to healing that need to be attended to. So now you ask, what do I do? I am going to give you 3 ideas of how you can handle this disclosure from your child. Then I'm going to share with you the consequences of not attending to the recommended actions. First, I would like to thank the National Child Traumatic Stress Network for the following suggestions that will help you, the non-offending parent or caregiver, with suggestions on what to do next. I have listed the contact information to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network in the show notes for you, and by no means is the following list exhaustive. Go check out the website for references, articles, books, and other resources that will help you out. The first thing that you want to do when your child is disclosing that they have been sexually victimized by a family member is stay calm as best as you can. I am not under the impression that your heart is not going to beat out of your chest, that your breathing will become labored. I am not going to act like there won't be a sense of outrage in hearing this information. That is totally understandable from my perspective. And I invite you to consider this term, co-dysregulation, which is a fancy way of saying if you get out of control emotionally, behaviorally, your kid is going to get out of control emotionally and behaviorally. They may exhibit that through screaming and yelling or other behavioral disruptions, or they may internalize that and grow to be very anxious, withdrawn, and the like. So in general, when a parent is regulated, they are more likely to help their child stay regulated. So if you need to take a beat after hearing this disclosure, which has turned your world upside down, please do your best to take a mindful moment if you cannot stay calm. Here's the next thing that you want to do. Believe your child. Please let them know that what happened was not their fault, and please practice believing your child. Children who are supported after disclosing incest and sexual abuse have far more building blocks to aid in their healing than those children whose parent and support system as a whole disregarded or invalidated their disclosure. That is a fact. Finally, protect your kid by getting them away from the perpetrator and report the occurrence to law enforcement immediately. This will not only help your kid have a sense of justice and a sense of protection, this will help in keeping other children safe from being victimized. Now, these 3 steps that I just mentioned are helpful and ideal. I am fully aware that you are human and this is not a movie where things go perfectly. This is not scripted. You cannot yell cut. You cannot take 2. This is your life. This is your kid's life, and your world has been turned upside down. Again, it is realistic and understandable that you would need time and additional support before learning more about the trauma from your child. That's not true for everyone. That's true for many. I invite you to consider the possibility of getting support from someone else before completing the conversation with your kid. This is desirable and recommended if you are in the stage of suspecting that incest has or is occurring. That is the case, speak with your child's pediatrician or a licensed mental health professional about ways to bridge this conversation with your kid in a skillful and supportive way. If the abuse has already been disclosed, the feelings that I named at the top of the episode are even more amplified as you attempt to wrap your mind around the reality that your kid has been victimized by someone that you trusted, know, and love. This is shocking, and this is life-altering, and it is heartbreaking. In many instances, when things are too overwhelming, there is an urge to escape the situation, physically or mentally, or avoid the situation altogether. I can tell you that I've met with children and adults who are survivors of incest quite often in my career. It is unfortunate and it is true. I have heard many times a survivor's story about a non-offending parent or relative expressing disbelief about the survivor's disclosure. Now, I mean disbelief in the sense of, I don't believe you. Sometimes they were told, don't ever tell anyone what you just told me. Sometimes they were told, just act like nothing ever happened. Just pretend like nothing happened. When the protector in this scenario of outright not believing their child or telling them to never mention this again or to act like it never happened, when the protector in this situation fails to protect by ignoring the kid's disclosure, disregarding the disclosure, expressing disbelief about the disclosure, there is a magnitude of psychological damage done to the survivor, which compounds their experience of trauma. Dr. John Bowlby explains in his work that the presence of even just one positive care figure can produce a protective shield around a child and mediate negative outcomes after disclosing being sexually victimized. The response received from a non-offending parent or caregiver is detrimental to the long-term success of healing for the child. Disclosure is most positive for the child when action is taken to create a protective and supportive energy around them on their behalf. Responses met with denial of the abuse, anger towards the victim, and blaming the victim will most certainly compound the child's experience of trauma. The denial of abuse from the non-offending parent to their child, the victim of incest, will plant the seed that the kid has to take care of themselves because other people cannot or will not do so on their behalf. Furthermore, the child will develop a sense of anger and feel betrayed by their non-offending parent who did not intervene and who did not believe them. In this moment, I am reminded of a situation that occurred some while ago. A mother who was away from home, running errands, returned to her place of residence and found her adult boyfriend having sexual intercourse with her then 13-year-old daughter. To my remembrance, the mother began physically assaulting her daughter and kicked her out of the home. She blamed the adolescent for the trauma happening, as the mother was under the impression that the youth had intentions to steal her boyfriend. As a result, the youth ended up homeless, eventually placed in foster care, and potentially still at odds with her mother. I like to think that if the adolescent's mother was aware of the process of child sexual abuse or incest, that, of course, the mother would have been shocked and experienced tremendous pain. I think that that mother would have had the wherewithal to seek professional support to learn more about what was actually happening. It was not the youth who was in error. It was the mother's significant other who was responsible for the trauma. I am uncertain of the barriers that came into play that prevented the possibility of therapeutic intervention in the previous example that I just shared with you. Again, it is possible that the youth's mother was not aware that her child was being sexually abused in spite of her being a young teenager. Research shows that adolescents who are victims or survivors of incest are found to have their disclosures met with blame more frequently than younger children. There are times when the parent may believe that the youth was responsible in some way for the abuse that they experienced. It is important to remember in situations related to incest or sexual abuse in general, there is a power differential. The adolescent may have been coaxed to engage in sexual behavior by way of grooming, by way of economic abuse, excessive or harsh discipline, or some other means of control exhibited by the perpetrator. It is important to remember that the perpetrator is always at fault. It is never, ever, ever, never, ever the kid's fault. If in the moment, the youth is experiencing the non-offending parent's reaction as blaming to the youth, this will create emotional and psychological damage, even more so if the youth experienced normal sexual arousal during the abuse. I mentioned this in the previous episode. It bears repeating in this episode. The body is designed to respond and to react to touch. This is a natural response that is not indicative of the youth wanting or seeking the abuse. Remember that. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network encourages non-offending parents and caregivers to ask themselves 3 questions if there is still a sense of anger and betrayal directed towards the youth. Number 1, what would it take for me to believe my child? Number 2, what would it take for me to not be angry at my child? And the third question, what would it take for me to not feel betrayed by my child? NCTSN, National Child Traumatic Stress Network, suggests that by believing your child, it would mean facing the fact that the person you've trusted and loved has betrayed, lied to, and used you and your child, which is absolutely heartbreaking and devastating and a lot to process. For you to not be angry with your child would mean that you would need to practice redirecting your anger toward the person who perpetrated the abuse. And finally, for you to practice not feeling betrayed by your child, it would mean recognizing the real source of betrayal. The perpetrator is the source of betrayal, not the child. So here's the resolution that I offer to you. Moving forward towards a path of healing would require the non-offending parent to be supportive to their child, because that is the single most important factor to help a survivor after they have experienced intrafamilial sexual abuse. As challenging and devastating as it will be to report the abuse that has been completed by a family member or friend to the family, it is the best thing that you can do to help your family heal. Children can recover from sexual abuse with the help of protective and supportive loved ones, as well as support from a licensed mental health professional. Healing is possible. Thank you so much for listening to the Honeybee Podcast. Until next time, peace.